The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Welcome to Let's Talk Autism. I'm Nancy Alspaugh-Jackson.
And I'm Shannon Penrod, and good to
Hi.
be here with
Good
you,
to
my
be here with
friend.
you.
And you're looking all summer beachy fabulous.
Am I?
Yes, you are. You always look so pulled together.
Oh,
you
thank
know
you.
I'm deeply envious of you in that respect. I always say this behind Nancy's back, that you're like a Barbie, like that you could put anything on her and she looks great.
Oh, you're so
like
sweet.
you could pick any outfit out for Barbie and there's nothing that's going to look frumpy or weird or wrong or whatever. And Nancy's like that too.
Thank you, darling.
I've never been like that. I'm like, oh, it's too short-waisted for me, or it's, you know, it's cut wrong, or
Right.
I don't have a neck, or whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean? But she always looks, and I enjoy how put together you look.
Thank you.
It's very enjoyable. I was saying earlier today that I want to be like somebody when I grow up, but I know that I'm never going to be that. Like,
Right.
That's just,
Right.
you know.
Okay, well, I think you look put together enough every day.
Thank you for lying. Okay. In any case, we've got a big show for you, as always. We got some in the news that we're going to cover, and then we've got a great guest. You talk about experts, and we say here that we bring you experts on a regular basis. Okay, you ready for this? Strap your in, put your
Right.
seatbelt on. Dr. John Pruett is going to be with us today. He's the principal investigator of IBIS, which is the Infant Brain Imaging Study. Okay, so get the hip waders on, because we're
Right.
going to dive in.
He can explain to us the study.
Yes, and why it is so pivotal and why it's so important. And we're going to ask him all the questions, all the things that inquiring minds want to know
Right.
about infant brain imaging and what that's going to mean for autism and what it's meaning right now. But let's launch into the news first. I don't know, this first article, we found it in The Guardian, and I think it's another one of those right?
Which, yeah.
We like to cover those here on the show, those
Right.
moments where research comes out, and it makes such great sense that you go,
Right.
did we really need to research
Right.
that? Although, you know, I'm seeing more and more in my elder years that when you are able to say to somebody, no, research has shown, they pay more attention.
Yes, exactly.
They believe you instead of going, I don't
So maybe
know
something
about
we
that.
think we all know, but it's good to have the validation of the research.
That's exactly right. But I call
And
those
that's what this kind of study is.
Okay, so this study, the headline here is Autistic Children More Likely to Be Involved in Bullying. And I thought this was interesting on a lot of different levels, but I thought that it made great sense that our kids on the autism spectrum are more likely to be bullied.
By both their siblings and schoolmates.
And
But
I thought the sibling thing, because of course, you know, we both have kids that are only children.
Right.
So that hadn't really been, it's not that it never occurred to me, but it wasn't in the forefront of my mind, is that, in fact, when Jem went to preschool, there were two kids in his class who were not on the spectrum.
Right.
But they were younger brothers of kids who were on the spectrum. So those moms took us in and said, come on over, we know the autism thing. And what I noticed was that they were not good playmates for my son because they knew how to push all of his buttons.
Interesting.
And they could get him really riled up. And so eventually I was like, I don't think we're available for that play date today. And I remember thinking, oh, it's because they know how to do that to their brothers.
Right.
but I hadn't thought of that as a form of bullying, right? But you had 2 siblings.
Yes.
Was there ever any bullying that
Yeah,
went on
my
in your
brother
house?
bullied, my older brother bullied me.
Yeah. I think that there was a certain amount of bullying, but in my family, that because we were 3 kids too, it was always 2 would gang up on one, always. It was never all for one for all. It was
Right.
2 of us that would gang up on the other one, and if you were lucky enough to be part of the 2, then you had a leg up.
Yeah.
But if you were on the outs, now you had a brother who was special needs.
I had a younger brother who had Down syndrome, so
Yeah.
we had to take care of him. But my older brother, 2 years older than me, oftentimes bullied me and,
Yeah.
you know, harassed me and did all kinds of things like that.
Because that's kind of what siblings do.
That's kind of what
it's
older
no
brothers
indictment
do.
of him,
Right.
Right? But it is kind of what siblings do. So
Yeah, we
why would
fought.
why would kids on the autism spectrum be left out of that? But it does bring up that maybe more support is needed for siblings and for kids that are on the spectrum dealing with their siblings bullying them. I did think this is the first time that I recall a study saying that kids on the autism spectrum are also prone to be bullies. You know, that has been bandied around for a while and discussed, but it's the first time that I've actually seen that in a study. It is by far not the norm, but, you know, there are many more kids that are bullied than bully, but it makes a certain amount of sense too. You know what they say, that a bully becomes a bully.
Right.
So if our kids are more likely to be bullied, then it makes more sense that some of our kids will end up being bullies.
Yeah.
And something
The
to be
study
mindful of.
found that at age 11, 2/3 of children with ASD reported being involved in some form of sibling bullying, compared with half of children without autism. So
Isn't that
it's a
interesting?
significant number.
That's a very significant number. Excuse me. So, what's the takeaway for this, and what will we as parents take and do with this? I think is the big question. And you know, I'm wondering for you. I shudder to even say this, but I'm sure at some point Wyatt has experienced some form of bullying.
I think so. I don't know whether he's been aware that he's been bullied,
Yeah.
but I think he's been bullied at school some.
And what kinds? Because I know that my son has, and it's the worst because you feel like there's not a lot at your disposal
Right.
to do. We tried to be as proactive. I remember the first year that we were doing Autism Live, we covered a study that came out of Santa Barbara, and it said, you know, here are the ways to make your kid bulletproof. And it was one of those studies that takes a bunch of studies and puts them together with all the information that you can find. And so it was this thing about make your kid bully-proof, and it was find a group of kids that they can be friends with because it's harder to bully a group than
Right.
it is an individual. And we took that as seriously as a heart attack. One of the other things that I really took to heart was they said, find the thing that your kid does and does well, and set up some sort of a circumstance around that there's a group. So if your kid, the example that they used, that I think they did in the study, was that there was a teenager who loved graphic arts. He
Right.
loved to draw things.
Right.
And so they talked to the mom who went to the school and said, can we start a graphic arts club? And they started it, and other people came, and because this kid was so good at it, they made him the president of the club. And now he had this group of like 11 kids who were into the same things that he was into, and that made him less likely to be somebody who was bullied because he had status and he had a group. And then he had self-esteem because he had a group. So we've always taken that really seriously, and I don't know that it has completely made my child bully-proof, but and then one of the other things that we did was, and I was bringing up wrongplanet.net on Wednesday's show, but Alex Plank was on the show
Right.
years ago, and he had made a video with Liz Lang from the Peers program about what to do if you're being bullied.
Okay.
And this sort of non-reaction that if you have a big reaction, go, hey, you're a bully, right, that it feeds it.
Right.
So that if somebody says something to you like, you know, you're an idiot, you go to them. And, or just go, oh, Is that what you think?
Right, don't
So-
feed it by reacting.
Right. So it's just this like you can't touch me kind of reaction. Instead of defending yourself, you just sort of like, okay,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
That's what the response is that takes the heat out of it because they're not getting anything out of it. And I think that can be very effective.
Right.
Obviously, it's not going to work in every single circumstance because the kid walks up to you and shoves you, saying whatever isn't going to get it done, right? But have you had to do things with Wyatt or for Wyatt to work around things?
No.
That's wonderful.
I mean, I haven't been aware of any, his case manager at school has not. She has what they call red flag people.
Oh.
And she tells Wyatt to stay away from the red flag people because those are the bullies. So he
Okay.
knows not to engage them and
Interesting.
be around them. Yeah, it's a good way of avoiding bullies, teaching kids.
The first time that I found out that Jem was being bullied was in 2nd or 3rd grade.
And how did you find out?
I found out because I found a note in one of his pants pockets. And I went to him and I said, what is this about? And he said, oh, there's these 3 kids and, they're saying X, Y, and Z. And I was like, what? Because one of the little boys was one of my favorite little boys from the time that he was in kindergarten, loved his mother,
Right.
loved this little boy. And I was like, he's saying that to you? Like, and I remember going to my husband, and about 2 days later, they had an assembly, and we went, and I remember my husband, who is Santa Claus.
Right.
My husband is the nicest.
Right.
And these are like 2nd graders. These are little boys. And my husband was like, point the 3 out. And I was like, and what are you gonna go do?
Right.
Like, what are you gonna go, like, have a face-to-face with them? Or are you gonna threaten them? Like, he was like, I don't know, but I need to know who the 3 are. He got very intimidating.
Right.
And
Did he deal with them?
no, I was like, stand down,
Right.
Rambo.
Because that's
And-
supposed to be something that you're not supposed to do
Right.
as a parent, is going.
No. And it really brought up for me, especially because it was this one little boy that I loved so much, it brought up for me that bullies are not what we build them up to be. Like we think of the bully as being the really horrible person that needs to be taken down a peg and blah, 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 when in fact sometimes they are very hurt people
Right.
who are trying to get attention in ways that is not appropriate and that they need support. And that is in fact what we did. We made sure that Jem got support, but we made sure that those 3 boys got support and that they, you don't always get to know everything in a school setting, but that we knew that they got support, a great deal of support, and that the classroom got support. They had somebody come in and do a whole bunch of work with the classroom over it. And I rode the school like a pony
Right.
about it because I thought we're going to solve this this year in 2nd grade and it'll never happen again.
Right.
I really did think that, but it's, it's life.
It's an ongoing thing.
Of
You
course.
can't, and you can't avoid it. You just, and
Of
it's
course.
interesting that you found out about it. You might not have found out had you not found that note.
I wouldn't have known,
Right.
and I would never have guessed.
Yeah.
And we had been inviting that one little boy over to the house. He had recently stopped coming, but I would have continued to invite him and I would not have known. And he was super nice to me always. But you know why he was super nice to me? Because I was nice to him. And I had seen that one of the teachers, because he'd been in several of Jem's grades, one of the teachers I felt was bullying that kid.
And do you think he was acting out because of that?
I maybe, but I stood up for this kid with that teacher, like went to the mat and said, that's not okay. And that teacher didn't like me because of that. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes people get uncomfortable. Like it could, I don't know. I don't know why, but it ended up he wasn't in class with him ever again. But the bullying thing is, I really learned that year, it's not who you think it is. It's really nice kids
Right.
that are hurting in some way, Or, as was explained to me, that there's this status ladder. And if what I don't want to be is the person lowest on the ladder. And that these little micro societies get built in classrooms, and that very savvy kids look and go, oh, I'm not going to be the person on the bottom, so I'm going to gang together, just like me and my brother and my sister. You wanted to be in the 2, not in the 1. So I'm going to gang together with these 3 people, and we're gonna label you the person who's the lowest status. And that way, I will have status. I won't be the odd man out. And that happens in 2nd grade, y'all.
I know.
It's just like crazy, right? Okay, so we covered bullying. Now,
Next story is one of those deep research stories, which you should go on Spectrum to find out more about it. But it's different forms of autism may share a pattern of chemical tags on DNA.
For the longest time, the only way that you could diagnose autism was if you went to a licensed psychologist or to a person who was an assessment tech, and they would look at your child and they would tick off boxes and they would go, yes, in my opinion, this person is on the autism spectrum.
They looked at behaviors.
Yeah.
Which is the only way to diagnose.
But there is a certain amount of that's subjective. And we've all been looking always for the missing piece. Well, what do these kids have in common? And is it something you can see with a naked eye? And we keep covering on the show that, in fact, there are times when we can now see it with the naked eye, or maybe with a microscope. But there are chemical signatures. Last week we did a whole thing about the brain scaffolding. We're going to be talking with Dr. Pruett about the way things look on an MRI, and when can you predict and where does it show up. And so this study is looking at brain tissue of individuals and looking at the DNA in the brain tissue to see are there signatures that identify people who are on the spectrum and people who aren't on the spectrum. And there are differences. Yes. The first time that we covered here on the show that CARD had been a part of what I call the poop study. It's a very different name that they have for it. It's like bio something or other that I can't say. But it was the poop study. They were taking poop and urine from kids on the spectrum, kids not on the spectrum, and siblings on the spectrum. And they were looking at different things that were present in the poop. And the kids who were on the autism spectrum, when you look at the sheet, I went, oh, that's different. How come on the kids who are neurotypical, all these little cluster things are over here, but for the kids who are on the spectrum, they're over here?
And the kids on the spectrum shared those traits.
Yes, across the board, they all did. Okay, and it was like the amount of Clostridium in their feces. Right. And you go, well, that's significant. Like, that's something. Why is it different? So now we're seeing that it's down to the chemical level in the DNA. That's what this study is showing. So, and that they can look and see Rett syndrome, and this is the very makeup of who we are. And they're able to look at this. So there's no way that you and I can understand this, because I think you'd have to be our next guest.
Yes, who understands all of this molecular level.
Yes. But just to simply understand that we are getting down to it. We're finding all these differences, that there's differences in the DNA, there's differences in the chemicals
that might be able
in the
to
DNA.
be applied to infancy.
It's a fascinating thing. I think that we are right on the verge of a ginormous breakthrough of understanding, not quantifying it and saying that it's good, better, or best, right? I always say that now my way of looking at it is different operating systems, that there are an operating system like a Mac and an operating system like a PC, right? But we have to acknowledge that within that, when people are on the autism spectrum, that sometimes there are great deficits that label them disabled, not always. And that many people are able to lose that disabled diagnosis, but for those who aren't, we have an obligation to find out what is this and what are the differences, and then I think it's going to get very interesting.
I agree.
You and I have talked about this before, about what if at some point they're able to go back and say, oh, we've identified that it's this. This is what separates, that it's this chemical, and if you take this pill, then you will no longer have traits that put you on the autism spectrum. And then, it's going to be a very messy day. Because would you choose to take that if you were someone who was on the spectrum?
Right.
And would you choose to give that to your child
Right.
if you were a parent? And I remember when my child was 6, my answer absolutely would have been like, of course we would take that pill. And then I remember when we were 11 and I was like, oh, I don't know if we'd take that
Right,
pill. And I
right.
can tell you I would not give my child that pill. Now, where I am. But I think that's going to be different for every parent, and I think it's directly related to how much is still where you consider your child disabled.
Disabled on the autism spectrum, because I would take that pill for my son.
Right, and I think that there are a lot of parents that would, and there are a lot of self-advocates who are going to scream bloody murder
Right.
and say, don't give this pill to somebody, but they're in a place where they're able to do the things that they want to do.
They don't
and
see it as a
some,
disability.
And so, well, for them, it's not.
Right.
And I honor that. But for some people, I think that Wyatt is frustrated sometimes that he can't do the things that other people could do. And Wyatt's a brilliant painter.
Right.
There is a part of me that wonders if there were things that Wyatt didn't have to contend with, what would Wyatt paint? But
Yes.
see, this is where we get into the conundrum. What if, giving him the pill, he loses all of those
Right,
things,
took away that
but he
ability.
loses the ability to paint?
Right.
And none of us knows. It's
Yeah.
a conundrum.
No, we don't.
It's a conundrum.
And it's going to be sticky, like you said, when the day comes.
But I think we're getting close.
I think so too.
I think we're getting close. Okay,
This is
so
a happy story next.
yes, a palate cleanse.
Yeah, Boy Scout with nonverbal autism earns the highest rank, and only about 6.5 of all eligible scouts earn this honor. His name is Tommy Hargate. He's 21. He has nonverbal autism, and he joined that Boy Scout troop when he was 11 years old, and he was determined to become an Eagle Scout. And after 9 years of hard work, he achieved that goal.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that, we talked about doing scouts and then we just never got around
Right.
to it. Did you guys do the
No,
scouts?
we didn't do Scouts.
There's a growing number of individuals who say that how amazing it is for young people to be a part of Scouts when they're on the autism spectrum, that it teaches a lot of things that are very helpful
Right.
and useful, and helps build self-esteem and creates that group that we were talking about being anti-bullying. I'll be honest, for us, it became a question of the amount of money.
Right.
It was expensive to be
Is
a part
it?
of
Is it
well,
expensive to be a
because they
scout?
had to have the uniform, and
Right.
as I recall, the uniform was more than $100.
Okay.
And then there were activities and things, and when we 2 different times we investigated it, and 2 different times I was like, I just can't afford that right now, and that kind of bums me out. I'd love to hear from somebody who's in the scouting world if there's a scholarship or something, because nobody
I'm
can
sure
tell
there
me
must
anything.
be.
Anyway, because I hear nothing but how great it is. And certainly, there have been times in the last years where I certainly could have afforded a $100 uniform, but not while we were in the thick of intervention when we needed this the
Right,
most.
right.
We just couldn't.
Right.
So,
So anyway, it's great for him.
Yes.
His Eagle Scout Service Project, he organized and managed the annual summer field day. So he was really quite involved. He planned the activities and he oversaw the fellow troop members. So it's more than just outdoor skills,
Yeah.
essentially.
I love the quote, what the Boy Scouts have done is important not only in giving him outdoor education experience, but giving him the opportunity to interact and relate with other people his own age. There's
Right.
always that social piece
Yeah.
that so important. All right, so we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back with Dr. John Pruett. He is the principal investigator of IBS, which is the Infant Brain Imaging Study. We're going to go deep. I'm going to try to tune my brain
Keep
up.
up with it. Right.
And keep up, yes. We're gonna, science in the house coming
Right.
up next.
And
Stick
hopefully
with
he'll
us.
make it simple for us.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi everyone, welcome to Camp Ed 2019. And we are so excited because this is our first camp where we're in our new home. We have an incredible ballroom dance class going right now. So let's come and take a look.
Camp Ed at the Ed Asner Family Center is an inclusive arts camp featuring some of your favorite arts programs. We have a little over 3 weeks of camp left. We want you to come and join the excitement.
Hi, I'm Nava Pasquitz-Asner, the co-founder of the Ed Asner Family Center and the founder of Camp Ed. And I'd like to introduce you to Andrew Pascal, who is my new camp director for 2019.
We have a very action-packed last 3 weeks of camp. Next week we have Art Week, where we're going to do a color run. We're going to get really colorful. We're going to tie-dye some clothes. The week after that, we're doing Heroes Week, where we're going to talk about heroes as well as fictional superheroes. Our last week is Surf Week and Celebration Week. And Nava, can you tell us a little bit about Surf Week?
Yes, definitely. This is my favorite day of the entire summer. We're going to be working with the amazing surf therapists of A Walk on Water, and they're just going to give us a great day, beach, fun, just a really wonderful, safe day. Please come join us at Camp Ed 2019.
Yeah!
Woohoo!
To join us for a week or the next 3 weeks, call us at 818-302-0712. Once again, that's 818-302-0712. Camp Ed and the Ed Asner Family Center were created by our family for your family.
Well, I'll be hornswoggled.
Do you provide care services to someone with autism? Recently, more and more children are being diagnosed with the condition and getting the support they need as awareness grows. But what happens to these children as they grow up? It's estimated that over 500,000 youth with autism will turn 18 in the next decade, and they'll be faced with a very difficult reality. As children with autism grow up, their services start to disappear or become very difficult to access. Things like medical care, mental health counseling, vocational training, and more. All services that are still desperately needed. The loss of support that youth with autism face as they grow up is so severe that it's referred to in the autism community as falling off a cliff. Adults with autism need the same level of support they had as children to avoid falling off the services cliff. Introducing Skills Living, the web-based software designed specifically to help transitioning youth and adults with autism so they can avoid the cliff and instead fly to success. With Skills Living, help your learner with autism develop the skills they need in all the critical areas of adult life, including self-control, planning, and problem-solving, effective communication, performing life skill tasks for independent living, acquiring and maintaining employment or other meaningful activities, developing and maintaining social skills and relationships, accessing transportation and public services, and being safe. Skills Living includes a comprehensive assessment, a data collection mobile app, behavior intervention plan builder, and automatic progress reporting. It also provides a complete curriculum addressing 16 key areas spanning the entire range of functioning adulthood. Skills Living is easy to use and can be implemented by schools, parents, and autism service providers. Call or click today for your free demo and see how Skills Living can help your learner with autism avoid the cliff and instead reach their fullest potential. Skills Living. Wish, learn, become.
And we're back, and as promised, now we have with us our guest, Dr. John Pruett. And Dr. Pruett is a child psychiatrist with a PhD in systems neuroscience and postdoctoral training in the cognitive neuroscience of autism spectrum disorder. He's also an attending physician in the child psychiatry clinic for infants, children, and adolescents and families. He evaluates 1 to 3 year olds for ASD, and he trains child psychiatry fellows, residents, and medical students. So quite an impressive resume there.
And he's joining us today because he's the principal investigator of IBIS, which stands for the Infant Brain Imaging Study. So, Dr. Pruett, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. It's a real honor to be on your show and to speak about our work. So I'm representing Washington University School of Medicine and the IBIS network. We have a website, ibis.network, ibis-network.org, And this is a large study of brain and behavior development in infants at risk for autism. I should say right up front that Joseph Piven at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, has been the overall network principal investigator, and I'll talk soon about the new project that I co-lead with him. And so we are studying brain and behavior development in infants who are at risk for autism spectrum disorder. And one thing that we've learned over the last decade is that infants who are at high risk, that means they have an older affected sibling with autism, that new infant will have up to a 20% chance of developing autism spectrum disorder. But the research has shown that those babies at high risk who go on to develop autism or not, they look for all the world typical during the first year of life. So it is very difficult on behavioral grounds to make any guess in the first year of life which high-risk babies will end up with an autism diagnosis and who will develop more typically. We have, in the IVIS network, done a lot of research to define behavior development and to look at structural brain development, the development of wiring between different areas of the brain, and how different areas of the brain talk to each other, what we call functional connectivity. And that's my particular area. So IVIS started in 2007, and we joined in 2009 to add what we call functional connectivity MRI, or fcMRI. And we can use scan acquisitions that effectively look at how, say, this part of the brain talks to this part of the brain. And the amazing thing is that we could do this while subjects are sleeping or lying quietly in the scanner. The point about sleep is important because the scans that we do in babies are performed while the babies are naturally sleeping. So they're brought in, nursed, or bottle fed, and they go to sleep and they're swaddled and they go into the scanner bore and they sleep while the data are being acquired. Our network recently published some papers showing that we can predict which babies at high risk will eventually have a diagnosis of autism at 24 months from brain images taken in their first year of life. One paper was led by Dr. Heather Hazlett from North Carolina that was published in Nature in 2017, and that used structural MRI, looking at pictures of brain structure and showing that changes in the development and expansion of brain surface area between 6 and 12 months led to increases in brain volume between 12 and 24 months, and that these findings at 6 and 12 months had what we call an 80% positive predictive value. That means if the test says, wow, this baby will have autism, there's an 80% chance that that measurement is accurate. In parallel to that, we had a study looking at functional connectivity, as I mentioned previously, how different parts of the brain are talking to each other to perform different tasks. And this study showed that functional connectivity scans at 6 months of life have a similarly high level of accuracy for predicting an autism diagnosis at age 2 years. And that was led by Robert Emerson, and the paper was published in Science Translational Medicine. So the new project that you mentioned is funding we just received from National Institute of Mental Health to replicate and extend this work. And on this project, I am the co-principal investigator with the overall network PI, Joe Piven. And here what we will be doing will be conducting similar tests in 250 new high-risk infants who will be assessed at 5 clinical sites associated with our study. They will get careful behavioral assessments, MRI scans at 6 and 12 months, and then they return at 24 months for careful diagnostic assessments to see if they do or don't meet criteria for autism. And the importance of this, in science, it's critical to show that findings replicate and to show that they replicate in an independent sample. And this is what we are being funded to do right now. So if our findings told in this new sample and with data acquired on a new scanner platform, this opens up the possibility that we may have made progress toward developing a true clinical test for autism in high-risk infants in the first year of life. And what this would then enable would be the possibility of pre-symptomatic intervention studies. So I mentioned that there aren't behavioral features characteristic of autism in the first year of life. So here we would have the opportunity, based on MRI findings, to assign infants to controlled studies of infant-developed interventions to see if these improved outcome more than the interventions we currently have that are effective for infants at age 2 and toddlers at age 2 or 3. So I hope I explained that.
I've got a bunch of questions.
Yeah, you did explain it very well.
It was great, though. It was
Yeah.
great, but I do have a bunch of questions. So, both of us are autism moms,
Right.
and over the years, we've heard different things and we've seen certain research. So I just want to run a couple of things by you. You tell me if I'm getting this right. Because you talked about a time period in which the brain surface expanded at a really rapid rate. I remember a time when my son was being diagnosed and they were talking about that what they were seeing is that kids with autism, that their brains at age 3 were the size of what they should have been at 14. Is that the same thing that we're talking about?
So that's an excellent question, and those are the findings that led to the study that I described in detail. And some of those original findings were done by IBIS Network researchers years ago. And so the story was that on average, individuals who end up with an autism diagnosis have somewhat larger brains. It isn't that I could take a tape measure and put it around your head, or that I could look at the volume of a brain on an MRI scan and say, oh, that clearly shows that this individual has autism or is at risk for autism. But the findings were that on average, people who went on to develop autism seem to have larger brains. So this study added to that by showing, yes, okay, at 24 months, the brains of the babies who developed autism were larger, but the important thing was that it showed between 6 and 12 months, there was this increase in the surface area of the brain, and that's what correlated with the later volume change. And that increase in surface area was what, and we apply very complex computer algorithms to analyze these brain images, but the computer algorithms using machine learning looked at that and were able to then show at an individual level this highly accurate prediction about which babies would develop autism. So excellent question.
And you could see that between 6 months and 12 months. You weren't seeing anything, any predictors of it before 6 months.
Right. So the changes seen in that structural imaging study were the changes in surface area, the rate of change of surface area between 6 and 12 months. And I mentioned the functional connectivity study that I was more closely involved with that looked at functional images at 6 months. We don't have data yet from earlier time points. We have attempted to get data like that. It's very challenging. But at the moment, our earliest findings that have a very high predictive value are the data acquired at 6 months.
That's amazing. But I wanted to ask about the functional connectivity, because I don't think I understand completely what that is and how you get towards that. Like, my head wants to say that it's about how you explained that it's how your brain interacts with each other, but how can you see what that looks like in a sleeping baby?
That's another great question.
I'm killing it with
You're
questions.
killing
I can take a minute to walk through it.
Yeah.
As I'm with trainees or students. So when we do structural imaging, you can loosely think about it like taking a photograph of the brain. Here in functional imaging, it's like taking a movie, and it's like looking at what's happening over time. Each snapshot would be a frame of the movie. And so if I were to do a functional imaging task-based study where I had you do, say, a visual task in the scanner, I could shine a light. That light would hit your eyes, your retina. Information would go to the back of your brain where your primary visual cortex is. Neurons there would be more active. When they are more active, more blood flows to that part of the brain. That blood brings more oxygen than your brain needs. And that changes the ratio of oxygenated to deoxygenated hemoglobin. That's what's in the red blood cells. And that causes a magnetic change in the blood that the scanner picks up. So again, I shine a light, neurons fire in the back of your brain, we get this magnetic susceptibility change, and it looks like this, okay?
Interesting.
Now, if you're just resting there, your brain isn't doing nothing. Your brain is always active, randomly firing all different parts of the brain. And for every one of those periods of spontaneous activity, that signal in the brain is going up and down with the spontaneous activity. Just like in the task-based case, if I shine the light and part of your visual cortex was active. So now, spontaneous activity here, spontaneous changes in this blood oxygen level dependent signal that the scanner measures. We call it the bold signal. If this part of the brain talks to this part of the brain, activity here is driving activity here. The firing of these neurons will be in synchrony with the firing of these neurons, and those blood oxygen level dependent signals will go in synchrony. And so when we acquire functional connectivity data, we're looking at how tightly related those different signals across different parts of the brain are. And when I said that you could do this based on how things are happening at rest when you have spontaneous activity, that's a variant of what's going on when you're lying asleep in the scanner. And it is kind of incredible. It almost seems magical that we could collect this data and look at sort of the fingerprint of how all different areas of your brain would work together when you're doing things when you're awake. But we can kind of see this through these sleeping, resting state functional connectivity scans, and we can pick out networks that would be active. Motor network, visual network, attention network, etc. And then we could look at how these develop in babies from 6 months to 12 months to 24 months, and we could look at how the development of these functional networks relates to the later development of autism in the babies who are at high risk.
It's really kind of fascinating. I mean, I have a bunch more questions, but I'm leaving room for you. Did you want to ask something or let me go?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I also wanted to double check because you talk about you've already been able to do these studies and already be able to see that you can predict successfully, but my understanding, and check me on this, is that now with this new study, what you're looking to do is simply to reprove it with a different group of kids, a larger group of kids. So you're just, as you say, replicating your first study, you're just making sure that what you found in that one study is what you'll find again.
Another great question, and yes, and that's critically important for basic science and clinical science, for the field of autism and for the field of medicine in general. So studies have to be replicated to really show that they hold up, to show that a prior finding, though it seemed very solid, and the fact that we have these exciting predictive results using structural imaging and functional imaging make us think that there's a very high likelihood that they'll replicate. But we still have to see that it will replicate.
Okay, so
the study, the one is to replicate what we've done before, and the other is to extend that beyond just saying that we might be able to predict which high-risk babies develop autism, yes or no. But as you know, and I'm sure many in the audience here know, autism spectrum disorder symptoms go on a continuum. And they're continuously distributed in the general population. And so we, in the second aim of this project now, want to additionally see if we can predict individual levels of continuously measurable behavior that's associated with autism.
Wow.
Language behavior, joint attention behavior, that's how infants and parents coordinate their attention with objects, motor behavior, and repetitive behavior. Because these are all behaviors that are and could be targets for aspects of future autism interventions that might improve outcomes.
So in a way, is it saying too much to say that you might be able to predict levels of deficits, maybe even levels of severity?
Well, that's the idea, is to predict from first year of life MRI individual profiles of these abilities at 24 months. I have to add, as a clinician who evaluates toddlers for autism, that it's very tricky to prognosticate or to predict further into the future because there's a lot of play between 24 months and age 5 and beyond, where things may be more solid in terms of predicting eventual outcome. The IBIS project, more broadly, is funded now to bring back the previously studied infants at age 10. And so our network may have the ability to answer some of these very specific questions about early data and predicting school age function. And so that's a very important part of the story. But so, yes, the short answer is predicting individual profiles, but in terms of high or low functioning, we need to think about the longer life trajectory and where people are ending up later on. In our case, with this early developmental study in the school age years.
Now, are you already into this study, and do you have the participants already?
Thank you for asking that. So we are beginning to do recruitment, and we are now IRB approved to enroll families. Again, I mentioned our website, ibis-network.org, and families could go there. We're recruiting nationally. There are 5 different sites. So our site, Washington University School of Medicine. We also have University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, University of Washington, Seattle, and University of Minnesota. We additionally have a data coordination center at the Montreal Neurologic Institute and MRI and behavior analytics sites at New York University and University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. We also have a genetic core, genetics analysis core at Johns Hopkins University. So we are very excited to be launching our recruitment.
What's required for families to participate? What's expected of them?
So again, we are studying high familial risk infants, so that means there's an older affected sibling with autism, and we're enrolling babies at 6 months. And so the families will be coming for 6-month assessments and MRI scans, and then enrolling in this longitudinal study where they will continue to have contact with us over the next 18 months and return for 12-month visits and scans and return for 24-month visits where they get a research diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
And I saw in the notes that one of the things that you're hoping to eventually be able to do is pair this with some behavioral intervention and see if you can improve outcomes, both by starting earlier, but also looking at targeting. Help me here in terms of if you see that there's going to be a deficit in a certain connectivity, designing behavioral interventions that specifically address that.
You said that perfectly. That's exactly what we hope for the future. And so again, with this notion that high familial risk infants have a 20% chance of developing autism, if we don't have behavioral features that tell us who will and who won't have autism in the first year of life, it's very inefficient, very cost ineffective to think about doing a large-scale randomized clinical behavior intervention study. But here, if we replicate and we truly have something like an 80% positive predictive value for MRI test in the first year of life, then we could think about triaging infants who are positive on a test like this to a randomized controlled study of behavior interventions. And as you said, there could be neuroimaging to see if brain networks change in response, and the whole idea is that those changes in the brain may precede observable changes in behavior, and that could give a signal that things are going on the right track. I will also add that we're thinking carefully about extending beyond the high familial risk group to general population, where rates are much lower. And here we'd be thinking about some other form of screening yet to be determined that could say that a general population infant might be at more increased risk. And then we could also think about doing MRI in those infants that pass, say, a first level screen, and then would move on to a future MRI test.
Yeah. There's this much talked about in the autism community, this phenomenon that if you could catch a child early enough before they're behind on skills, if you could see that things in their brain were going in a certain direction at 6 months, let's say, because then you only have the potential to be 6 months behind in your development, and even then maybe not entirely 6 months behind, that it wouldn't take you long to get caught up, and that then children would they would not progress to end up they would never get an autism diagnosis, because in essence you would cut it off at the pass. And there have been some groups that have said that they've been able to take children at a year and a half, and to be able to get them caught up so that they never qualified for a diagnosis. It creates an issue with funding, because if your child doesn't have the diagnosis of autism, how do you get the services that are so expensive? You being able to predict this could help to prevent that from happening, so that a parent down the road, maybe 5-10 years from now, could say, we already have one child on the spectrum, our second child has shown all the markers, can we start services as early as 6 to 12 months? For me, that's a really exciting way of looking at autism. Is that part of what you're envisioning?
You described it perfectly, and that's what we are envisioning. The idea that we want to identify early and we want to get early intervention going. The thought is that early intervention will lead to greater improvement, and here we're extending that by saying if we could identify in this pre-symptomatic period, we might be able to achieve even greater improvement. But again, that would have to be tested clinically. So if we are able to replicate our predictive findings, then the behavior intervention experts will, and I know some are already working on this right now, figure out how to translate existing behavior interventions for toddlers for use in infancy, and then we'll have to do the actual controlled test to see, we identify an infant based on an MRI scan, we randomize them to an intervention versus a control group, that early future infant intervention does in fact produce a greater improvement in outcome.
Okay, so hang on. Now I've got the hardest question of all. All right. Okay. So you're going to take these 250 kids into this study, and you've already done a study where you're trying to replicate, and it's important that you replicate. But let's say that you get a year into this and you're identifying kids and saying these kids have the same markers as the kids in our previous study. Will you then be recommending to those parents to start intervention, or does that mess up your results? If those kids go into intervention and then they never end up having autism, will that mess up the efficacy of what you were trying to do?
That's an absolutely fantastic question. And the field has seen a change in MRI are now at to the point that we are forced to use new scanners for all the new data that we're collecting. For that very important reason, the machine learning, predictive classifiers, the computer algorithms that we developed associated with the prior papers, there's no saying that they would work on data acquired with the new scanners. So to really do the replication study, we need to actually follow the subjects all the way through their point of diagnosis so that new computer algorithms can be trained on the new data that are acquired. So it's kind of, we know the outcome and we look back and we see how did these scans predict the outcome. That generates a new algorithm that we can use. So we will not have the ability to give families diagnoses in this new study. We don't think.
Right.
We are, of course, going to try to test the old algorithms, and we're also partnering very closely with bioethics experts in the design of this experiment so that we can help understand this and also contribute to the field in terms of understanding the ethics of early or pre-symptomatic screening for autism.
And the truth is, when the average age of when a child gets diagnosed with autism is 6 in the United States. So even if people invest in 2 years with this and at the 2-year mark find out that in all likelihood they're looking at autism, they will still be way ahead of the game. Correct, Dr. Pruett?
Well, so I need to emphasize too that research and clinical practice are two separate things. And so we're doing this in the context of a research study, and we're not assigning a clinical diagnosis. So we do in the present study, as we did in the prior study, have IRB approval to return clinical information that we acquire, the behavior information, the assessments, that families can then take to their pediatricians or developmental pediatricians or neurologists for recommendations about their child's care.
Okay.
And the people involved in the study at our site and all the other sites have clinical providers. I have an autism clinic, multiple others in our study here do, et cetera.
Okay, well, this is fascinating. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's hit the websites one more time. Where do people need to go if they want to be a part of the study?
Sure. It's ibis-network.org, and I mentioned the sites and my co-principal investigator on the new project. I just would also like to take a moment to give tremendous thanks to all the families who have been involved in our studies previously, to also say how excited we are about the opportunity to work with new families in this new cohort, to mention our prior funding from NICHD, Simon's Foundation, Autism Speaks, and our current funding from National Institute of Mental Health.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much
Yes,
for the
this
work
is-
that you're doing.
It's going to be a game changer.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a real game changer.
We
for
really
families.
appreciate you taking the time to do it, and so we wish you luck, and please come back and tell us when you've got more information.
I would love to do that.
Okay,
Wonderful.
thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you
Pruett.
so much.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Nancy.
Bye-bye. Wow. Honestly, it's so exciting
Can you
to live this
imagine
time.
predicting autism
Yeah.
at as early as 6 months? I mean, it's
Well, and look, how many families do you and I know? How many autism moms do we know that have 2 kids?
Right.
And talk about what the process was like when the first one was being diagnosed, and then they turned around and went, oh, wait a second, my second one has
Right,
it as well?
right.
And how devastating that is. And, I love that eventually they'll get to the point where they can look at kids who aren't second kids, but for families who have multiples, this, honestly, we're going to have in another 2 weeks, we're having a wonderful guest. She's been on the show before, Ileana Gershlovitz, who had exactly this happen.
Right.
And she has written a book called Saving My Sons. And but the process of having the second child diagnosed
Much earlier.
And because she diagnosed him early, you know, he's right as rain and
Right.
doing so great.
Right.
So and the value of that, man, she can speak to that firsthand. So huge game changer for funding sources.
Right.
Looking at earlier, we've heard for a long time that there are groups that are taking kids. They have to have different funding because they don't have a diagnosis, but they're taking kids that are siblings who are predicted to be on the spectrum, who already have some deficits. They work with them. Those kids never end up needing a diagnosis, an intensive ABA, because they got the deficits taken care of. I think it's a brilliant,
It's exciting.
thing. All right, but we are totally out of
Tell
time.
us what show you have on Monday.
So next week, we're going to have on the show, you're going to see amazing, and I'm not sure which day, because I'm not sure if Amy, anyway. I know that next week we are having Joanne Lara and
Okay.
Susan Osborne from Autism Speaks.
Not Autism Speaks,
Not
Autism
Speaks.
Works.
It's like my brain went on vacation. I got so
Okay.
excited about the science. It was taxed so
Okay.
much. But it's from Autism Works now and from Autism Movement Therapy that
Right.
they are definitely going to be with us. And Bonnie Yates is back with us on
Okay.
Monday. That much I know for sure. But other than that, I'll keep you posted.
Okay, great.
All right. We'll be back. Until
Okay.
then, give your kiddos a hug from
And
me.
yourselves a hug from me.
Bye-bye for now.